All right. Hello. Welcome, you guys. We're gonna get started in 1 minute. Just letting people trickle in. I'm gonna put this cardigan on because otherwise it looks like I'm naked. The struggle of tube tops. It's a really exciting topic. Yeah, I really enjoy talking about this topic. Hi, Jen. Um, yeah, okay. We're gonna begin. Jenna. And go ahead and just notice as you arrive and kind of allowing your body to settle here. Hi, Jenna. Notice how your body feels as you arrive. Is there anything that you need or your body needs? Do you need water? Do you need a blanket? A sweater? A pillow? Maybe you need to readjust or change positions. Okay. So we're going to begin, and we're going to start with a grounding practice. Give me 1 moment as I just adjust this. Okay, we're going to start with a grounding practice. I just like literally ran here from a yoga class. It was Taylor Swift themed as like the Tortured Poets department. So that was cool. But so I'm like, yes, thank you, Victoria. So I'm my heart's beating kind of fast right now because I like sprinted in from that. We're all coming from different places. So we're gonna take a moment to orient. So go ahead and look around your space. So really slowly, kind of letting your neck start to move over to the right. So just allowing your head to turn over to the right, eventually going all the way past your shoulder and just noticing what is in your space, what's behind you. Look at the colors, the textures, the objects, until you're looking all the way over your right shoulder. And then slowly come all the way back, looking around, up, down, all around, noticing how it all lands in your nervous system. And then over to the left, scanning the colors, pictures, objects, colors. I think I said that twice until you're all the way past. Looking over your left shoulder and just notice what is back there. And then slowly come back. And before noticing the Zoom room in front of you, go ahead and take a moment and orient towards your body. So just noticing your body being held by the chair that you're sitting on. Maybe you're laying in bed or on a couch and just noticing where is your body being supported. And then maybe noticing your feet on the ground, noticing a second point of contact with your body and the floor. Maybe if you're holding something, noticing how that feels. Especially nice if you're holding like warm tea. And then maybe staying here if this feels good, this awareness of the periphery of the body, or maybe noticing how the heart space is feeling, the belly, the breath, the shoulders, the throat, the jaw, the legs. And then noticing if there's anything there that wants to like move or make a sound, or for me right now, I just want to and just noticing what's there, getting curious about the impulse, and then maybe doing that impulse, making that sound, taking that movement, if it's a stretch or whatever it is. And then whenever you're ready, oh, start to bring your awareness back to the screen and notice how it feels in your body to orient towards the Zoom room, like this virtual space. Okay. All right, so welcome, welcome. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to hop right into it today because I have um, a lot on the docket. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to write them down so that you don't forget them. And then at the end, we'll have a time for Q&A. So today we are talking about, Jenna, it's so nice to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. We're talking about how the villain helps you heal from people pleasing. So, oh, oh, okay, wait, close your eyes. I don't know why it started on. Okay, there we go. All right. So what to expect today? So, grounding, which we just did. We're going to define what a villain is. I think this is like something that's important to do when we're encouraging people to connect to their villainous parts. We're going to talk about the role of shame in healing from people pleasing and just healing in general. We're going to talk about the desire to be perceived as good, archetypal play, which is really what all of this is, like playing, and it's almost like role playing as the villain. And then we're going to do a brief inner villain practice and then a Q&A at the end, and we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. Okay. All right, so define a villain. So I think it's really important to define what it is I'm referring to. When I talk about being a villain, me and Parvati have this whole group called How Villains Are Made, where we help you connect to your inner villain. And I've seen different, variations of a villain. I've seen people do some like really crazy stuff and then be like, well, I'm in my villain era. And I'm like, okay, well, we're not like encouraging, you know, like psychopathic behavior. That's not what this is. Um, when I think of a villain, I think of like someone who I've been reading a lot of like fantasy books lately, so I'm imagining someone who's like has a manor and they're like gardening and like painting and like eating delicious food and having parties in their manor, but then everyone outside in the village and everything kind of like talks crap about them or has these stories about them, but this person, this villain, just doesn't really care. And what they're focused on is living their most pleasurable life, regardless and despite the misunderstandings and the twitterings of other people. So that's what I feel like is a villain. I'm curious what you guys think, or like what your what you think of as a villain, either in the context of this work or even outside of it. So go ahead and put in the chat your thoughts. And I know for myself, the idea of, the being a villain, I think like 5 years ago would have scared me a lot, because a villain's someone, I think generally that oh, I'm so sorry, I don't know what's happening with the slideshow today. I think generally it's someone who is very disliked and or misunderstood, or people perceive them as being bad or dark or having bad parts. So I think 5 years ago, I would not have resonated with this work. Go ahead and drop in the chat, what is your definition of a villain? Okay. Reading from the chat, I think the stereotypical definition stemming from fairy tales, etc., would be someone who's evil, bad, hated, but I'm open to learning other definitions. Yeah, definitely. I think that totally when you look back at the old Disney movies too, they're very like binary. Like it's like we have the good guy and the bad guy. And there's like no redeeming qualities about the villain. They're just like bad. And then at the end, they get what they deserve, which is like death or suffering or something. And I think that creates a lot of feelings around, like we'll talk about this in a moment too with overcouplings, but if I'm bad, I'm gonna get what I deserve, which is like suffering and living a painful life. I used to think a villain was someone who didn't care for the well-being of others. I think there are villains like that too. However, now I think it's someone who's misunderstood and has a label of being bad if they're not easily agreeable. Yeah. Someone who breaks rules and challenges authorities and institutions, they're defined as evil because they're in opposition. That makes me think of V for Vendetta, Jen. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but like these, yeah, right? These kind of like this, I don't know, maybe an anti-hero is like the right word, but definitely not he's against institutions. I think a villain, someone who's not afraid to live their lives by their own rules, not caring about what is right and wrong, fair and unfair. Yeah, great, beautiful. Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, so yes, I think it's important to kind of know like what this is and what it's not, and in the context of this work in particular, because some people they go really far, which is nuanced. Okay. So I have a whole podcast episode and YouTube called Is it your villain era or are you just being an asshole? So if that topic of like defining the line resonates with you, I encourage you um to check that out. Okay. So what happens when you shove away your bad parts? So these parts of you that are bad that we don't want other people to see, we end up with a lot of shame, and shame is extremely dysregulating to our nervous system. It almost feels like a waging war on yourself. And what happens from the perspective of shadow work is like we have this house. This one's pretty intense. But we have a house, so we have like all the parts that we show other people. So the parts that we probably push forward. So for myself, it was like, I'm a good friend. I'm patient. I will listen to the Uber driver talk about his trauma for an hour. I blah, blah, blah. I'm this. I'm all these things that I had experienced, culturally and familially through my family as, you want to be these things. These are desirable qualities that will make you likable. And then we have our like bad parts, and we don't want people to see these parts. And so we actually lock them in our basement, or we lock them in a cage, or we shove them away. And so it creates this kind of like dissociation from those parts. So they're still there, right? They're like still on the property, they're still within you, but we're now dissociated from them. And what happens when we shove away parts is that it creates an inner tension. So we have this inner tension within ourselves. I would say like both psychologically and physically, because we're like trying to shove this part of ourselves away. For myself, it was like the parts of me that would be angry, parts of me like cold, callous parts of me that now I think are actually really helpful in certain situations. I was like, I do not want to be perceived as cold and callous. I don't want to be I don't want to be someone who says no. I don't, all these things. I don't want to be perceived as bad, and these could be perceived as bad. Loud. I was not. I was very quiet. Um, 10 years ago, like people didn't even know I was there, which was probably part of the reason that I was so quiet, because I wanted to just blend in. But so whatever you have labeled as bad, and it creates this inner tension. So psychologically, we're spending this time and energy to distance ourselves from these parts, and then also physically, it creates an inner tension in our bodies. So I'm just referring to my notes. And then on top of that, when we are constantly like orienting towards, this happens a lot in trauma work in general, when we have like shame, or we're constantly orienting towards those like parts of us that we want to like shove away. It's just very dysregulating on your nervous system in general. I have a whole podcast episode about this as well, called Shame is Fucking Up Your Nervous System, with Dana Dawsey. So that's a really great resource if this resonates with you. But that's the gist. And it also creates dissociation, which I know I already mentioned, but in the form of, like, for example, if you don't want to be perceived as an angry person and you're like, I'm not angry, no, I don't, no, it's gonna come out, and it probably will come out very forceful. I think this happens a lot with people who are like, they will like say things and they genuinely don't remember saying it. Like, it's just it comes out eventually, but it's just comes out very dissociated. Like, there's this meme that's like, oh, for my parents, it was like a random Tuesday, and for me, it was like the most traumatic thing in my life. And I think it's genuinely, especially when you're really angry, you actually get dissociated from it. You might not realize what you're saying. You might not be present at all. And so that's what happens when you are disembodied from these bad parts. Okay. Next is is overcouplings around being bad. So overcouplings, just to define what an overcoupling is. So overcouplings, I believe, is a term from somatic experiencing. So it's basically any meaning that you give something beyond what it physically is. Like, so for example, this cup, it's just a cup, right? To like most people, just a cup. Well, if like someone who, like an ex-boyfriend, gave me this cup and it was like a really bad day when he gave it to me. For me, like destroying this cup, like, why would I want to destroy this cup? Well, because for me, I have overcouplings around it, and it has meaning beyond what it is. And so for many of us, we have overcouplings around being bad. And I think we already touched on it through like the Disney movies. Like, overcouplings can come through media. They can be cultural. They can vary on the country or the state or the region that you're in. They can also be from your family. They can be traumatic overcouplings. Some are traumatic. Like, for example, if you have a smell, I smelled a smell today in yoga, and I was like, oh, it kind of made me sick to my stomach, because I had memories associated with that smell. Whereas someone else might smell that smell and go, oh, that smells like my wife. And it's like a positive overcoupling. And then also just personal, they're different for everyone. So for us, many of us have overcouplings around being bad. So being bad is not just neutral. It means, for us, it might mean, like I said earlier, okay, I'm bad now. Now I have to suffer. That means, I remember there was a time in my life where there was people literally coming to me saying, wagging their finger saying, you're a bad friend, you're a bad daughter. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm bad, then does that mean that I need to pay a penance? Do I need to suffer now? Do I deserve to have a good life? I like really didn't feel like I did. And we have overcouplings. Oh, we're going to get rejected. We're going to die alone. For me, I go straight there to the end zone, from like die alone in a pit with penniless and just, terrible. I go straight to the end zone sometimes. So I think we all have our own overcouplings around being bad. So being bad is not just being bad for many of us, it's being bad and having to suffer and going to hell and not deserving happiness, not deserving friends. So I think that's important to know when we're talking about this as well. Okay, so this now we're gonna let me just refer to my notes. Okay. So there's something that is really interesting when you try so hard to be perceived as good. And if you resonate with being a recovering people pleaser or a fawner, it feels so safe to be perceived as good, because especially if we have these overcouplings around being bad, well, what are our overcouplings then around being good? If I'm good, I will be loved. If I'm good, I will be rich. I will live a good life. I will be beautiful. People will love me. Men will love me. I will, be deserving of nice things, blah, 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 blah. The list goes on. Um, it also lowers our threat level when we're like perceived as good. So I think a lot of us, that stems, we want to be like the good kid or like the good, if you've like experienced bullying, it's like easier um, to quote survive the bullying when you are as like small and quiet as possible. So, I think most people assign being like quiet and easy and what's the word? Manageable, not really putting up a fight as good. And so the thing is that it's really interesting what happens if you guys have seen the show Traders. I have some pictures of Traders. This is my business partner, Parvati Shallow, and she was on Traders and she went into Traders. She has a background and was explicitly labeled as a villain in her show Survivor that she originally played. They had a season where they had heroes versus villains, which like it was very good. You should watch it. But she said it really liberated her to play as a villain because she hadn't really thought of herself as a villain before. So she's like, okay. And so she's very much accepting of, I'm gonna have fun with this. I'm gonna play as a villain. She was a traitor. So if you're not familiar with the game, it's like a murder mystery type thing. So she was like one of the murderers. And Peter from The Bachelor, he was part of this group that was very dead set on like, we are the faithful, which are the people that aren't traitors, and you don't know who's who in the game. We are the faithful, and we are like really just, he was like wanting to be perceived as pure and good, and I'm a traitor finder, and we're gonna banish them and blah blah blah. And he actually at one point got offered to be a trader and he said no, which is crazy because in the statistics of the game, you have a much higher chance of winning the prize pot at the end if you are a trader. So my whole point in this was like, he was so concerned with being perceived as good that he actually let go of like a possible financial prize. And then he also was not able to like play the game as fully and all these things because he was really concerned with being perceived as good. Um, and so for a lot of us, it comes down to, can I allow myself to be misunderstood? Because there's people that see Parvati and they adore her. They're like, they love her and they love how she's a villain and this like sexy woman who claims this like dark feminine energy. And then there's people that are disgusted with her because they are like, oh, a woman who's a murderer, and she's not actually a murderer, but on the show, and they're disgusted. And it's like, ultimately, can you please everyone? No. But it's, I think when you start to be more true to yourself and let go of allowing yourself to be perceived as good, then the next step is, can I allow myself to be misunderstood? Can I allow myself to not have to curate your experience of me? And you will save so much energy when you start to do that. We had some people in our villains group last year who stopped drinking coffee because they were like, I just don't need it anymore. I have more energy because I'm not constantly like fawning and being like, oh, da, 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 da. They just say no. They did customer service at a restaurant and they were like, just tell people no and don't do the whole charade. And I don't need coffee anymore. So it's a really high energy tax when you are trying to be perceived as good. It's very exhausting. I'm sure you know that. I'm sure that's why you're here. Okay, so archetypal play. Let's take a moment and just check in first, actually, before we move on. I'm gonna have a sip of water and just notice how your body's feeling. If you need to get up, move around, take a sip of water yourself, take a stretch. I'm gonna refer to my notes. Okay. So archetypal play. So I have a background in the tantra space, and in tantra yoga, there's traditional yoga, which is probably what you think of when you think of yoga, which is like the asana poses, the breathing, and meditation. Tantra yoga, and it's very more like upper chakras. So it's more like, how can I rise above this anger? How can I um like rise above pain or things like that. With Tantra, it's more lower chakra focused. So it's more like, how can I experience my body? How can a lot of the practices are meant to facilitate a deeper connection with your body through breath work, through embodiment practices, through sexual healing practices, whereas traditional yoga is a little more like upper chakras and maybe like even at times dissociative. Not always, but it can be. So with Tantra, they have a kind of practice called archetypal play. In archetypal play, the idea is that kind of similar to going back to that house, we have different parts within us and different aspects of ourselves. And so with archetypal play, they'll have these different archetypes. They'll have like the maiden, the wise woman, the sacred slut, all these different, like the bad girl, the good girl, all these different archetypes. And then you practice embodying these archetypes. So like they'll play a song and you'll embody this part. So with inner villain work and just this kind of work in general, me and Parvati really encourage like archetypal play. And that's a big part of our villains course. And I also have that in Venom too, which is like, how can you just get loose and get playful around this whole thing with being a villain? We encourage people to like dress like their villain, create a Spotify playlist, and like listen to music that makes them feel villainous, almost like you're cosplaying like a villain or like your villain that you've made up. Mine changes. Last year it was it's just whatever inspires you at that moment. People use like Disney characters, they'll use like people from media. Um, Last year mine was Cruella de Vil. I was like really inspired by Cruella and how just like sassy she was and how she would dress. And this year I'm really inspired. I have this like image of like this sassy French Parisian girl who's just super bitchy and constantly smoking a cigarette and just like, no, I don't care. And I'm like, I love. And so it's really what resonates with you. And really just get loose and like playful around this because there's a few reasons this kind of like play works. Number one, it helps to create neuroconnections faster. That's actually really proven. They see it a lot with like kids in play therapy with children. And then also, okay, no, I remember it. Also, it helps to release the shame because going back to that whole aspect of shame, shame feels the somatic experience of shame is so heavy and dense. And when you are able to play, it really helps to release that shame. And it's like, okay, well, now I'm playing with it. Like this deepest, darkest, Like for me, my shame was being angry for a long time. Like I was like, I don't want to be mad and blah blah blah. And that's still something that I experience, like that feeling, that inner tension of I don't want to be perceived as like this angry person. People comment that on my stuff all the time. Well, you're proud of your violence and you're angry and all these things. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'm an angry bitch. And I will like have just venting sessions, but they're like fun and dramatic, almost like a theater performance where I'm like, and this, and this, and this, and it helps to release the tension. So when someone calls me, you're kind of an angry bitch, I'm like, I know. You're just preaching to the choir, baby. I know. And it helps to create, I think that's the next also resource. Existential Kink is a book that goes very deep into this. It's one of the core philosophies around a lot of the things that me and Parvati teach and how villains are made. It is not trauma sensitive. Okay, so just know that going in. And if you are currently in the throes of something sticky, like if you are currently dealing with something like hard, or like for me last year when I was the target of this witch hunt online, like that would not have been good in the moment, but it's like once you feel like you have more stability, that's a great resource. Existential Kink. Okay, I don't know what was that the next one? Oh, okay. Well, I think I'm missing a slide because I wanted to talk about how um yeah, basically what I just said, how when you start to release the shame and you start to own it, so essentially you're going towards the parts of you now. You're bringing them up from the basement. You're inviting them to tea. You're like, hey, part of me that was locked up. Hey, anger. Hey, loudness, whatever. Like, come in, bring it in. Let's have some tea. And or have a party, however you get down. And how can you like bring them into your life, whatever that looks like. And it can be in like a structured way. I actually encourage that to like have it be in a more structured way. So like, okay, I'm gonna make a theatrical performance out of trying to think of like examples. Um yeah, like you can dress up as like the angry part of you, or you can, really just the villain. The whole archetype of the villain is really meant to just be all those shadow parts, and you can bring them forward however makes sense for you. People get really creative. Like in the villains group, we had people saying like, I'm gonna wear a white dress and like roll around in the dirt and like drink a bottle of wine like straight from the bottle, and like just like I'm like just really creative things. And the whole idea is that you just get playful and fun with it. And so then when someone tells you, oh, you're so this, you're like, yeah. And it takes away the sting of when people tell you you're XYZ. And I think Taylor Swift does this really great if you're familiar with her music. She like creates these archetypes and these like different versions of herself, like an anti-hero. She's like this monster, this huge monster. And she talks about how people call her a covert narcissist and all these things. And these are things people have said to her. And now she's like, yeah. And it takes away the sting of when people say that then in the future. It just doesn't hit the same because you're not ashamed of those parts anymore. You're like, yeah, we're buds. Okay. So we're going to do a brief embodiment practice, an inner villain embodiment practice. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. So jump scare. And then we're going to move into Q&A. So you don't need to get up or do anything crazy for this. Go ahead and just think for a moment, and you can journal this, or, oh, actually, let's put it in the chat. Go ahead and tell me, like, what villain are you inspired by? And this doesn't even have to be like a traditional villain. I was just watching Perfect Match, and Francesca from Perfect Match is like a villain, and she's like so vain and has her hair, and she's constantly like adjusting, and she's like, no, and she's just very regal. And so what like person or villain just like resonates with you, or could even be, people have said before in the past, like a cat. My cat just has really good boundaries. Like, what person do you think has great boundaries? They embody this attitude. And go ahead and put it in the chat. Oh, Ursula. Ursula from The Little Mermaid. Proud of her body, takes up space, gets what she wants. Yeah, she's totally on it. People always say Ursula. She's so like sensual and like proud and confident. Just watched the new Wicked trailer this week. I don't know how to say that. Elphaba? Elphaba? I don't know, I'm sorry. Is definitely an inspiring villain. Cool. Yeah, for me, Cruella de Vil. Most French people, especially the Parisians. Catherine from TVD. What's TVD? Oh, Vampire Diaries. Nice. People have said before too, like Loki, Maleficent. Could be a traditional villain, could be someone who's more of an anti-hero, someone from reality TV. Okay. We're gonna move forward with the practice, but you can still totally put your villain in the chat. So go ahead and get comfortable in your seat. If you need to readjust, go ahead and do that. And start to really think, Thomas Shelby, start to really call this person to mind. And as you do that, connect with how would it feel to embody those boundaries? Like if you were that person, what would it feel like in your body? And what kind of attitude would they have? Would they lean forward, back? You can even start to play around with little micro movements. Would they have their chin up, down? Would they have their feet kicked up? And you don't even have to fully do the posture, but even just imagining yourself in it. Like feet kicked up on the desk, cigarette in hand, leaning back in your chair, whatever it is. Maybe walking out. Maybe your villain's like, I hate this workshop. And they're like, no. And then imagine yourself walking out of the room and just notice how would that feel? And just notice that for a moment. And notice what parts of your body open up. If you feel anything shift, if there's any parts that feel a little stronger or lighter. If there's any like impulses. What would it be like to just embody this person's confidence, their boundaries? Mm. And then when you're ready, start to come back. So bringing awareness back into your space and maybe taking a few notes down if you are taking notes of what does that feel like somatically in your body to embody this villain? And if you feel like sharing in the chat, you can go ahead and do that as well. Powerful, open, brave, lighter, stronger. Beautiful. Confident, empowered, strong, put self first. Yeah, I really experience like a strong, I don't give a fuck energy when I'm like thinking of that Parisian girl. I'm just like, you could literally call me the nastiest things to my face, and I'd be like, okay, I don't care. And there's also something that helps drive us forward too. Loud, ooh, loud, dramatic, scary, unfiltered. Ooh. Felt less tension in my muscles and my imaginary wall shield I usually have on fading, but cool. Yeah, less tension in muscles. Yeah, it's really fun doing this kind of work because you can pick different people. And like last year, my villain Cruella was a bit more like manic and a bit more like in your face. And this year it's more like leaning back energy. And it's just interesting to watch how it changes or evolves for you. And then you can feel like, how does that feel somatically? Do I want, you know, a certain kind of energy more than others? Confident with my head held high, feel sure of myself and empowered. Awesome. Also, if you have a cycle, like a menstrual cycle, this is fun to change your villain with each phase of your cycle. If you're menstruating, you might choose someone who's just like, I'm imagining like the crab from Moana who's just like, my things, my gold, and like they don't want to like leave. Or like, I don't know, I picture just like someone who's just like with all their stuff and like doesn't want to move. And then when I'm ovulating, it's more the manic, like Cruella de Vil. Okay, beautiful. Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, I'm glad that was an interesting experience. Yeah, so what you can take from this, like as a tool, is definitely, I'm gonna share my screen again, is that practice. You can do it on the daily. You can do it as like a morning meditation. You can literally do it in the line at the grocery store, wherever. It doesn't have to be like this big thing. It's just calling to mind that person. What would it feel like if I was them? And then just noticing like, how does it feel, and allowing that feeling of that you guys all described, of strength, of confidence, of openness, of power. Just like, just feel it for a minute. It's really yummy sensation. So before we move into Q&A, if you want to learn more, this is a practice I have very fleshed out. It's like an entire module in Venom. Um, Venom's amazing. It's like my 101 program for healing from people pleasing, and it's all on demand, so it's totally at your own pace. There's two modules on anger. There's an inner villain part, there's an inner teenager part, because usually that's one of the parts that we put in the basement. Um, I think there's a shadow work module. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And then also, if you are like just wanting to fully dive into it, I offer high touch coaching containers. And those ones are just like absolutely incredible. It's meeting one-on-one, bi-monthly, and then also you get unlimited support via Voxer. And then also how villains are made is great. We just concluded our last one. We do it kind of annually, so just keep an eye out for for the one next year. But if you are really interested in this, me and Parvati, we just formulated a new offer that is going to have like amazing guest teachers. So it's actually, we've compiled a bunch of people from different reality TV shows that were villains on those shows. And so it's going to be just like extremely what's the word? A lot of different information sources, comprehensive, and that one will be a 3-month program that starts in October. So we haven't really officially announced that one, but if you're interested, send me a DM or an email, and we can send you the secret link. All right, so Q&A, I'm gonna stop my share again. So if you have any questions now, it would be a great time. We'll have about 10 minutes. You can put it in the chat, you can come off of mute. Okay. The type of yoga I mentioned earlier. So, Tantra. I'll spell it in the chat. Oh, that's not. So it's called Tantra Yoga. If you look it up online, you're probably going to find a lot of information around like sexual healing because their sexual healing is a big part of Tantra. It's like includes like crystal wands and yoni eggs where you're doing like physical de-armoring around the vagina or the vulva, or really just the body in general. But a lot of Tantra is focused on the sexual healing part. So if you do your own research, that's probably what you'll find. I definitely resonate with that. It's awesome in the right structures. If you can find someone who's like, if you're interested in that, actually, let me know because I have some amazing Tantra teachers that specialize in sexual healing that also have backgrounds in somatic experiencing, so it's a really good combo. But for me, I think the embodiment practices and the archetypal play really resonate. Yeah. Another good person to follow, her name is Madeline Moon. She's on Instagram and she has a background in Tantra and she applies it to relationships. So, like, for example, if you're mad at your partner, instead of being like, you didn't do the whatever it is, she's like, write them a note and like dress in a gown and like read them the note. Basically just having fun with it and like getting playful with it. And that's the part of Tantra that I think I resonate most with. Any other questions? If you want to come off of mute, just raise your hand too and I'll get to you. How can I pinpoint what triggers the fawning response in me? I'm wondering if there's a way to know the roots of it because right now I feel like it could be a lot of things. Like I definitely fawn when interacting with men and women, but with men it's kind of a different fawning response. Yeah, than the one I have with women. Yeah, so I'll speak to that first and then I'll answer your original question. So, fawning for I'll say just like minorities in general, like women, people of color, like that fawning is usually a go-to response just because of the power imbalances. Like power imbalances are a really big trigger for fawning, um, because that's where they begin, that's where they originate usually, like the power imbalance with our caregivers or a teacher or with the school bully who had more like social pull or whatever it is. And so I do notice that a lot of women in particular say like I fawn a lot with men, and just know that that's like very normal. And like there's certain situations where I think that that's super helpful and actually keeps you safe. Like someone was just telling me they were at a bar and this guy was bothering them. Like that's a great time to fawn because you're in like a place where maybe you can't leave super fast, um and that's like it's a safety mechanism. So that's very common. I'll just say that. And when it comes to pinpointing the triggers of the fawn response, I'll say like in somatics, we don't really ask why, but we ask how. So we won't be like, if you do a somatic session, for example, though that the why might come up on its own, but that's never like the goal is like learning why it happened, um, or why it happens. It's just like how does this express? So, and as you start to get curious, like if you get really curious about how is fawning expressing in my body, like you already know, okay, it happens maybe differently or more with men than women. It might happen more when, like for myself, when I'm just under more stress in general, like I fawn more. um if I'm grieving a lot, I'm gonna fawn more. um if there's certain people that make me uncomfortable, I might fawn with them. So there's a lot of different triggers. Usually the main one is like a power imbalance. If you really want to know why, I think like working with a therapist, I had a really great experience with EMDR, and you can tell them like what you're looking to work on, which would be like fawning and people pleasing, and then they could, with EMDR, they create a tract for you. So they'll set the goal, like, so they'll say like fawning, okay, my goal is to fawn less or become more aware of the fawning. And then they'll create an entire like structure. So they'll like ask you questions that's like, when was the first time you remember this feeling? Or and then you're able to kind of go back to like maybe the first conscious time that you experience this and then work on those memories in EMDR. And sometimes things come up. So a skilled EMDR practitioner is great for that. Not a question. I've started learning about limiting beliefs and how those play a huge part in the mentality. Oh, about the self, shame, emotions, expectations. If you can better understand your limiting beliefs about self or others, it can help transition your thoughts to recognize your inner truth. Yeah, definitely. That's like reminds me of existential kink too, because they kind of talk about, yeah, I guess limiting beliefs where it's like, um yeah, like, oh, I can't do this or I don't deserve this, and in existential kink she's like, oh, you don't deserve it, then like really feel that, like feel how you don't deserve it, and like can you find a certain pleasure in that, and then when you release that tension of stop like trying to push away that I don't deserve that and bring it in, it kind of like just dissipates. Is that what you're referring to, Jenna?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. We did a practice the other day of like in parenting or relationships, like does my partner always do this? Do I always lose my temper? Am I always ashamed of myself? Like, no, I actually am really proud of myself for accomplishing XYZ today. No, I did eat 3 meals today. Like, so it's not always, it's not, that immediate thought. That could be the limited belief. But what I really believe about myself, I have to like question that limiting belief. Like, do I really feel that about myself? Do I feel that way about the relationships in my life? I'm excited to look at that book, The Existential Kink.
Yeah, I think you'd like it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point of like, yeah, the always and the am I actually like this? Maybe so, maybe not. Yeah, like releasing the tension. Do you have guided somatic therapy resources online, as I'm just learning about this and would like to try it out? If you are looking for like a one-on-one type of support, like I mentioned, I have my 3 and 6 month containers, but those are like a longer time commitment. If you're looking for like one-off sessions, if you go to, I think it's traumahealing.org, let me double check and then I can say for sure. Yeah, traumahealing.org. That's somatic experiencing's website. And if you go to the like drop down menu, they have a directory. So they have people, I think, all over the world. And a lot of them are online. So pretty much no matter where you are, you can find someone. But that is like a good um, way to try it. But yeah, somatic, that's like somatic experiencing in particular. Yeah. Do you think that while adopting the villain side, you have to go through more friction, encounter more resistance and social contact? Sometimes I feel like fawning is an easy path. You just go with someone else's flow, so it's more hard to be a villain. Mm-hmm. Yes. It requires energy and it requires a certain nervous system resilience. So, absolutely, yes, everything you said. Being a villain, that's why a lot of times, like in courses that I teach, I'll teach this stuff in tandem with pleasure for resourcing our nervous system, like ways to like support your nervous system, because naturally, yes, you're going to encounter more friction in social situations, especially if you have created a lot of your like relationships, or networking or whatever it is, family relationships are based on fawning. When you stop fawning, there's going to be tension. And so there's definitely times when you just don't have that nervous system regulation or the resilience. I know for myself, I've been working on like healing from people pleasing for like 5 years now. And there was a time a couple years ago and I was just like grieving. I was like so deep in grief. Like my heart was just broken. I had some deaths in my family and I was just grieving. And I did not have the energy to do this. Like I weirdly had no energy to fawn, but then in certain times I was like, I can't deal with like I don't have it in me to deal with the friction. And so I would just fawn. And I remember telling my therapist, God, I'm really frustrated because I feel like I'm fawning a lot right now. But sometimes when your body is just under more stress, you have less capacity for these things. So this is really good to do when you're especially in like a more stable, especially existential kink, because that really pushes you into that space of like leaning in, of like, okay, someone doesn't like me. Can I find pleasure in that? Can I be like, oh, you're talking about me? Like that's what I like to say, is like, you're so obsessed with me. Like, why are you talking about me? And so but sometimes it's hard to do, especially if you are going through it. And so yes, that's a really great point, Lisa. Either fight or fawn response for me. Totally. All right. That will be all for today. Thank you guys so much for coming. It's so fun to see everyone. And this will be on my YouTube and podcast after if you want to listen to it again. And if you have any questions, um, you can send me an email. I'm just gonna refer this last question to a different resource. It says, can you talk more about sitting with the uncomfortability and setting boundaries and not being a people pleaser? My therapist recommended doing things like public speaking. Oh, to get used to the feeling. I have a podcast episode called Embodied Boundaries. I would recommend that one, embodied boundaries, and then also just practice. And also, I have a lot of resources on like pleasure and like glimmers and safety, and like really focus on that, Jasmine. And that helps to build your nervous system's like capacity and resilience for that discomfort. So obviously doing the discomfort, but also like babying the crap out of your nervous system. The podcast episode, it's also on my YouTube. It's called Embodied Boundaries. And that specifically talks about setting boundaries with people you love. But then, yeah, also just like anything of mine that talks about pleasure or nervous system support. So, all right, that'll be all. Thank you guys so much for coming. And I hope you have an amazing weekend.